let's get into the big topic of open source, something that we actually say at Red Hat.
This is so awesome.
We are an open culture that believes in
What is that process that a developer, or let's say
as the Kubernetes ecosystem really boomed? Welcome to a special May the 4th edition of In the Clouds. Yes, today is Star Wars Day. A friend of mine says that it is a cheap pun. We should probably be later in May when the original Star Wars was first released, but Red Hat tells us to bring our full selves. So I am Stu Miniman, your host of In the Clouds, and I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I apologize for any Mandalorians out there. I've probably broken the code by removing my helmet. But I am super pleased to have our mystery guest here, which anybody watching on YouTube knows who it is. Yeah, first time on In the Clouds. Happy to welcome to the program Chris Wright, who is the Chief Technology Officer and Senior Vice President of Global Engineering. Chris, pleasure to see you. Happy Star Wars Day.
Thank you, Stu. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. And the red Star Wars helmet, a note, this is not Red Hat branded. It's not quite the right color. And Chris, I always look at things when people ask me if it was Red Hat. I said, come on, we're the rebellion, not the empire. But we can appreciate the pieces. So great to see you. It's funny, Chris. I actually, leading up for this, I've known you for a bunch of years, but I had to do the regular thing, which is ask ChatGPT what it thinks of you, and asked like your contribution. And I mean, you've got a Wikipedia page, you've done a lot, in the ecosystem. And ChatGPT said, Chris Wright's contributions have helped shape the modern software development landscape, and his work has been instrumental in advancing the development and adoption of open source software. So I thought that was a nice introduction. We don't want to give too much kudos. As I saw on one of the social medias, the most human thing about ChatGPT is it thinks that it's smarter than it actually is. So you are a board member of the Linux Foundation. Correct. It said that you actually had done a stint as the CTO of the Linux Foundation, which I don't believe is quite the case.
Not exactly.
Yeah. So, but you are the CTO, and what was it? Last year you took over as head of global engineering.
That's right. Yeah.
So, Chris, yeah, let's just start. Here we talk in the clouds. Just if you could give a quick summary of, you've been at Red Hat a long time. You're very active in the upstream community. So give our audience just the quick thumbnail of you.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me here. It's really, really nice. And I've been at Red Hat for, over 17 years. Easy to remember because as I was being recruited and I was saying no because my daughter was about to be born. So I, as soon as she was born, and I decided that not making two life changes at once was smart. And then this infant was really easy, and I joined. Well, I was wrong about the infant being easy, but it's easy to remember how long I've been here. I started as an individual contributor. So I came as an engineer, background in doing a lot of software development, working really exclusively in open source communities. When I came, Red Hat was a one product company. I came to help us enter what became the cloud, but at that time was just virtualization. And now everything, we were under 1,000 people. We're over 20,000 people now. A lot has changed in those years. And we're still very focused on open source. I still spend a lot of my time connected to communities. I still am an engineer at heart, although I don't get a chance to write code as much as I would like to.
Yeah, no, Chris, it's, Red Hat, our focus so much is on community and contributions, and yourself, our CEO, Matt Hicks, both started, in the company, worked your way up through the ranks. And, that's two of our C-suite, sitting there. You are just back from a swing through Asia. Always love to get perspectives. We're going to talk a little bit about cloud. So let's get your perspective first. What's happening over in APAC? How's the cloud, as we often call it? How are they dealing with it? What are the opportunities and challenges that they see today?
Sure. Well, first of all, just to be specific, I was in Japan and Korea, and I've been to both of those countries before. It's always great to get out and see other people, see what's going on. Both of those areas have great focus on getting to the cloud. Whether I couldn't estimate, are they on par with other parts of the world or ahead or behind? It's probably a little bit specific per business. But the local governments are actually putting a premium on. Initially, it was more digital transformation. Today, it's more getting to the cloud. And in that context, one of the things that's important is digital sovereignty, data sovereignty. So there's a lot of conversation around where do you place your workloads? Certainly, how do you get your workloads into the cloud? And then because of that digital sovereignty perspective and having local cloud providers, immediately there's a discussion around some kind of multi-cloud or hybrid cloud strategy for any of the customers. So it was really, exciting set of conversations. A little bit exhausting to do the travel bit, but it was a good eye-opening couple of days.
Yeah, I was just a couple of weeks ago. I was at the KubeCon Europe show in Amsterdam, and sovereignty, local regulations, absolutely was a huge theme there. What was also interesting for me is, we really limited how many people we were sending from North America. So I got to meet, way more of the Red Hat, European community there. I knew a few of them, but when, a lot of times, you say, okay, Red Hat, we started in North America. When you go to an event, you have certain people. We are a global company. I look at, my team, Chris, I've only got 7 people and they're in 5 countries. You've got, thousands of people, and they're spread across the world.
All over the world. Yeah.
Love to just get your viewpoint, kind of the Red Hat global footprint. How do we look at it from a talent standpoint? And, there was an article, Arvind just wrote an article saying that, hey, he's a little concerned that especially our younger people learning in technologies, you're missing out if you're not actually interacting in person with your teams and your peers, some in person. Of course, developers and people writing software, absolutely you can work remote, but there's that balance of how do you do that? So global and some of that, I'd love your viewpoint on it.
Yeah, well, we are global. We're totally distributed. We have people all over the world, some in offices, some working from home. Of course, going through the pandemic, everybody was at home, and we're really focused on where appropriate, we can bring people back into the office for exactly the reason that you just highlighted, which is as much as we can do remote work, there's something different about being in person. We haven't, I'd say we've gone from 2D to maybe 3D in remote working, but we're not fully immersed and we don't quite have the same experience. So one of the things that we look for when we bring engineers into our organization is understanding how they're going to contribute, collaborate with open source communities, which is what allows us to be so distributed. But we still have work that we need to do together internally. So we try to create a balance of where can we bring people together, and being in Japan and being in Korea and having dinner with team members was really fantastic. And it shows that difference of the human connection that you develop when you're in person. And then you can really sustain that as you continue to stay connected virtually online.
All right. So, Chris, I'm really surprised. We've gotten a couple of well wishes for Star Wars, but we haven't gotten any Star Wars questions. Do you have a preference between the Empire and the Rebellion when it comes to Star Wars?
Oh, I am not a fan of the Empire. 100% Rebellion.
So I'm not saying I'm teeing it up for our next question, but somebody did ask about the Red Hat relationship with Oracle. And they said, I think it's looking like, hey, are we going to partner with them on the cloud? Definitely an interesting relationship, one that I watched from the outside. And, we've definitely made some great progress together recently. But, care to just talk about the Oracle relationship and what we see there?
Yeah, well, we just recently made an announcement of work we're doing together with Oracle, where we're supporting RHEL, Red Hat Enterprise Linux, in OCI, Oracle's cloud offering that they provide. So while we don't connect 100% on the Linux layer, and we compete in that space, and there's a long history in that competition, the reality is customers need their vendor ecosystem to work together, because there's really no one company that does it all. So, we focus on partnering, and the partnerships sometimes are technology led, sometimes they're actually really customer led. And this is an example where customers were asking really strongly to both Red Hat and Oracle, what could you do together to better support us? So, of course, we are happy to work with our broad ecosystem in general. It's kind of how we operate. We have core platforms, but we really don't do all of it. We really depend on our partner ecosystem to help build out all the capabilities or solutions that our customers need. And Oracle is just one example.
Yeah, it's awesome, Chris. I've actually, we're here in our corporate briefing center yesterday and today. I'm meeting with two of our really good partners. We partner with them in a lot of environments. We meet with them when it comes to the cloud. Want to switch? Let's talk about open source. I know it's a passion of yours. It absolutely is foundational to what we do at Red Hat. But it's funny, sometimes people always look at Red Hat and they're like, well, I don't know. Are you really open source? Oh, is IBM changing what you think? And the overall, discussion in open source, boy, has it been an interesting conversation in the last decade, just around business models, around, all of the technologies that are coming out. And, we could spend hours talking about this. I'd love, your take on, how is the state of open source today? What's your viewpoint on how that whole relationship works from a Red Hat standpoint?
Well, as you said, open source is fundamental to what we do here at Red Hat. And I'll start with the way we build our products. Everything we do begins in the community. We have an internal mantra. We call it upstream first, which means our entire product portfolio is built from code that starts in the upstream community, and then we curate it, combine it, build a distribution around it, and then deliver that to our customers, support that, and then lifecycle manage that. So everything we do starts there. It means we make heavy investments in our engineering teams to be part of those communities, because we're not just relying on consuming open source software, we're contributing to open source software to make it meet the needs of our enterprise customers, which those needs are pretty diverse, and they don't always match what's technically capable in the projects upstream. That's probably a big part of our role, is building what I call an impedance mismatch between the Wild West of a feature velocity focused upstream and the sort of stable robustness, resiliency world of an enterprise where they're running their business on this software. Open source, the way I see it, is it really is the innovation engine for the broad IT industry. Most of the interesting technologies that we see today start in open source communities, and different communities have different dynamics. Some are more led by a single company. Some are really diverse, and contributors come from all walks of life. Red Hat tends to focus more on those projects that have broader communities around them. And part of that is we're looking for these, I'll call them foundational technologies, that help the entire world shift and evolve into, say, a next generation. Linux is a primary example. We see Kubernetes in that same space, where so much of the world is focused on how they can deliver in containers, and Kubernetes being the primary orchestration platform for that. In that sense of open source is the innovation engine for the industry. I'll say open source has won, but wrong theme for today, but with great power comes great responsibility. And so, we're seeing a whole new set of challenges that are facing the open source communities. Some of that's just with scale, with winning and being ubiquitous. A security issue then becomes pervasive. So how do we manage those, and how do we respond quickly? It's not like we have unique vulnerabilities in open source. What's unique is the ubiquity of the code, and then actually how rapidly we can respond. And then, of course, it's the whole ecosystem that needs to go through the update cycle. So we've been focused in that area as one primary example. The other one is there's the business model evolution of where, what we do is 100% open source. There's a whole set of open core projects. There's been a robust discussion around how much cloud providers just take from open source and wrap a kind of proprietary wrapper around it, and then don't really give back to the community, but then monetize it. And does that shift the balance? Those conversations still exist, but they're not quite the roar they were a couple of years ago. And I think that's really just a testament to the value and the way open source development happens, the resiliency of those broad contribution bases that make it a successful way to build software.
Yeah, Red Hat still is the most successful open source company, and lots of questions out there. Will there be others that follow in our model? Can they follow in that model? You've got the engineering organization, Chris, and there's something I always look at. When you talk about open source, a lot of the people, especially inside Red Hat, they're very passionate about what they work on. many times they will think about their project and their activity first. And I love when we go to events like KubeCon, the team tells me like, hey, wear your project shirts, talk about project first. If we grow the pie of open source in general, if we help customers and peers and even competitors contribute, that broadens the overall scope. As you said, so open source is the default for software development today. That all helps us from a Red Hat standpoint. But when you talk about the resources of your people, how do you balance like encouraging their passion, yet you need to work on things that actually help our business? Is there, how do you balance that? How do we make sure that we're getting, your daytime hours actually contribute to the things that eventually, yes, it's upstream first, but it does help the things that we care about?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, we have some internal sort of principles, and one of those would be we really talk a lot about freedom, but we balance that freedom with accountability. And so the freedom to work within a community is important. The accountability is, well, we are a business in the end. And so we have to deliver products, we have to deliver capabilities to our customers. And how we work with the engineering team is really, or the teams is really, we encourage the creativity and the flexibility to do the right thing for the community. We try to make sure it's aligned to what we're working on within a business context. So, which could be, we care about long-term sustainability of a project. So we'll put time into refactoring, re-architecting a project. It doesn't have immediate business value, but it has that long-term, implication that, hey, this is a more sustainable, maintainable project. We'll also make sure that, and that could come in the context that we need to add a feature. But in order to add the feature, you could bolt it on, or you could do the complicated refactoring and then engineer it in. We're going to opt for that latter choice. And so that's kind of, it's a bit of a tension. How do you maintain that freedom and flexibility in the upstream and stay aligned to what we're trying to deliver as a business? But I think as a company, it's something that we do remarkably well.
Yeah, it was interesting. It was actually, I believe I heard it from Red Hat first, back when I was an analyst, that when you think of a developer contributing to open source, we used to think of, person in their basement or in their off hours doing it for their passion. And if you look at a lot of the open source projects, the majority of people today, it's part of their day job. They are being paid, and part of what they do is part of that. There are now some really big companies that are part of this. So you talked about, we used to think about the cloud providers as maybe taking advantage or monetizing open source without giving back. One of the biggest contributors to open source today is Microsoft.
Yeah,
I mean, when you started at Red Hat, Microsoft and Red Hat, oh my God, cats and dogs, fighting
and rebellion
and things like that. Today, Microsoft's a great partner. We've had them up on stage. We're doing a lot with them. Amazon, who has had a lot of activity going into the open source space, and Google. Heck, a bunch of the technologies we're talking about today came out of Google, and they are still there. So how do you balance that partnership? You've got some really big players with a lot of people and a lot of money that can create projects and influence things. How's that dynamic working?
Well, it depends on the context. So we partner really strongly with the cloud providers, and that's really, if I go back to the beginning, that's about customers saying, I want to run my workloads in the cloud for a variety of reasons. I want to run my workloads on a Red Hat product or service. And so we work together with our cloud provider partners to make that happen, make it as seamless as possible. I mean, we're integrated as native offerings in AWS and Azure, which is pretty cool and unique. In any case, we'll focus in the community side on just collaborating to make the community project better. Now, we might not agree technically on how to do something, so that's just normal across any community, dialogue about, here's a patch, here's a pull request, you get +1s, you get looks good to me, you get, what are you thinking? This is ridiculous. And that can come from any direction. So we have those types of relationships in the community. But we try to focus in the kind of customer side or commercial side. What can we do together? What's complementary? And when we're just 100% competitive, we'll just acknowledge that and then kind of steer clear of those spaces and let our customers just make those choices.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Great points there, Chris, and a lot of nuance as we go into there. We're a good way into the conversation. We haven't touched one of the hot button topics that I'm sure impacts you on a product and personnel,
What's your take on foundational models, large language models? Obviously, last year we announced the IBM Research and Ansible Wisdom activity.
Yeah.
We'll be talking a little bit about Red Hat Summit and what to expect there. I'm sure this will be a piece of it, but as an owner of engineering, what's your thought about this trend? It's amazing to me. There's a few times in my career where I've seen a technology that feels like, oh my gosh, we're in one of those, okay, jump to hyperspace moments where I thought I understood something, and 6 months later, you're like, oh my gosh, wow, look at this space.
Yeah.
So,
well, maybe 20 minutes ago, I gained a whole new appreciation for generative AI because it was so generous in how it described me. But joking aside, we've been working in the AI space really pretty actively for the last, say, 5 or 7 years. Now, we're not an AI company. Our focus isn't building the next algorithm. We're not going to introduce effectively a GPT-5 from Red Hat. It's really not our core competency, but we see it as a critical workload. Our focus has been first on the lowest level, hardware enablement. So GPU is often involved in accelerating machine learning workloads, whether it's training or processors for inference. And then the kind of surrounding software around that, which is all open source software to help make a data scientist, a day in the life of the data scientist easier. What I've watched is about 10-ish years ago, AI came to the forefront because of deep learning and neural networks and basically an advance in research. And combined with lots of data and hardware capabilities, we kind of had this resurgence of interest. Since then, it sort of peaked and then started to trend downwards, largely because people weren't seeing a ton of success in the business. They didn't know how to apply data science rigorously, consistently across their business and make it useful, which isn't to say it wasn't useful, it just wasn't being pervasive. What I absolutely love about where we are right now is all of the things we were talking about in that first wave of what's possible felt a little science fiction, a little abstract. With the introduction of something like ChatGPT or Bard or other tools, it's not only accessible to technologists, it's captured the world's attention. And that is a huge leap forward. And of course, it's not perfect. I mean, you heard my description, sounded compelling, factually, woefully inaccurate. So there's a little bit of that, like it's well written, but it may or may not be accurate. Actually, I'll say it's reasonably accurate. But that's just that'll refine and improve over time. The ability to help, whether it's a developer or another type of kind of information worker, accelerate their work. I think of it as if somebody gives you a rough draft and you work on editing it, it's going to go a lot faster than if you start with this blank page. You just stare at the blank page for a while. So we're in that stage of really seeing how exciting it is to speed up work, and it doesn't remove human creativity. I think of it as machine assisted or augmented human intelligence, and I think we're just at the beginning of a whole new wave, which is super exciting.
But Chris, you raised something that I think is so true. One of the problems those of us that live in the IT world is trying to explain what we do. So, the joke we all have is you go home over the holidays or things like that, and it's like, oh yeah, I work on computer stuff. Like, I remember, show my age. I remember showing people, when the first web browsers came out, we'd had, there was email and some things, but like the first graphical interface, showing some people, and it was like, some people were like, oh, it's a toy. And I was like, no, you don't understand. This is going to change everything. And over the next 5 years, you watched everybody kind of get it. Then cloud computing was one that, I joke, I was a blogger for a number of years, and my mother was one of my avid readers. And she was like, oh yeah, you'd explained, and I kind of understood cloud computing before I heard about it on the news or National Public Radio or things like that. And I was like, oh, cool. But still, most people today, if you talk cloud computing, you don't understand it. We had a holiday weekend a couple weekends ago. I could talk to my brother-in-law and my cousin about, foundational models because they were either playing with the graphical ones or ChatGPT or absolutely had heard it on the news. Yeah. My teenagers, understand this, and it is something that's connecting that behind the scenes work that we've all done forever to a much broader world. And,
hopefully it's that danger of, will the next generation actually be able to write playbooks and code or everything, or will they just go to an interface and hopefully trust what it does? But we've seen that programming change before too. As to when I learned to program, I mean, you wrote lines of code. You didn't go to a repository and then edit it. So
yeah. I mean, it's probably over trivializing it, but if you think about a lot of developers either look at things like Stack Overflow or actual code repositories, and I mean, cut and paste is a pretty common way of building software. There's nothing wrong with that. It's like that's part of how you learn. You could almost say this is like a really fancy form of cut and paste, because it's learning from a bunch of data sources and then applying that to the work that you're directing through spoken word or natural language. I think it's really exciting. Now, there's also the flip side, which is, how close are we to Skynet? And differing opinions. There's been a lot of news about this recently. I just got asked. I was with some customers yesterday, and they said, "Well, is the world coming to an end?" I said, "No, I really don't think so." But I would say it's probably going to get a little uglier before it gets prettier, because we're going to have to learn and figure out how to balance, the misinformation that can come out of tools like this, with the real value that tools like this can bring. And so, it's not unusual for technology to have really useful applications and super negative applications. It's about society and being able to responsibly harness the technology.
Sure. We need to teach to understand, to filter and understand what you can trust. I've contributed to Wikipedia before. Can you trust Wikipedia? Sometimes, sure. Trust but verify. Understand what you're talking about. If I do a Google search, if you just look at the ads, might not be the best source of information. Even if you see the first few links, who is controlling that algorithm and the SEO of that? Understanding some of that underpinnings, sure, we should have a little bit of skepticism and doubt, but as you said, what's the source? What's behind it? I worry that most people don't understand how to really understand and validate whether something's good. If you get a response from ChatGPT or something like that, can you do a critical analysis of it and say, okay, here's the good pieces and here's the pieces that maybe are questions, and where can I validate from a source standpoint? It's an interesting balance. When I wonder if you get an Ask Me Anything from your engineering team, do they have to worry about their jobs in the future? We saw, again, some companies out there is like, hey, what jobs will this replace? Philosophically, from my standpoint, I hear you saying it's going to get a little ugly, but overall, the people that can take advantage and work with the technology usually are better. I am a technologist at heart, and by definition, that means I'm excited for the technology, but absolutely there's those risk imbalances, and how do we take advantage of it so that actually we can supercharge our productivity in our careers?
I actually don't much get the question, is this going to replace me?
Yeah.
And I think that's because our engineers are seeing more the value of the tool, because like I said before, it's almost like it's an optimization. How can you move more quickly and focus on the more creative parts of your job, which is typically the parts that gets developers most engaged. And there's a more rote part of turning the crank and writing code and debugging code that sometimes is super enjoyable. Sometimes it can be really frustrating. So I think it's more a question of, can we use it? And there's a whole set of legal conversations that actually haven't been sorted out yet. And I work within a bunch of different communities, and communities are thinking about, well, can we accept AI written code bases? Yep. And does something like the DCO apply the attribution to, I'm the originator of this code, or it came from an AI system? And then of course there's some of the license discussions that have already been in the news. So we're going into uncharted territories, which means we got a lot of learning to do. But I'm really optimistic that this generation of basically AI or foundation models that do transfer learning, it can be applied in a lot of different spaces, and we're going to see that they're more useful than harmful, and they're probably here as a big part of our future. So it's really about how do we work with them. And there's work in trustworthiness of AI, understanding what goes into a model, how it makes decisions. Some of the different people in this industry are thinking a lot about the ethics and even coming together and writing ethical standards inclusive of religions as well as technology companies, which is kind of new and fascinating. So we're just stepping into a really new space.
Yeah, no, definitely so much. It was at KubeCon, the CNCF, I know in their board meeting had a discussion about what
That's
they, how they were going to manage that. And there are implications we need to think up. I'm glad you brought up just, the ethics and bias and things that we need to worry about, because we need to be more inclusive. And, Red Hat absolutely is a loud voice in that space to try to help along that activity.
Yeah, well, we hope to be able to support. Diversity to me is important especially in communities, because it's part of the resiliency of a community. Within a company, it's part of building a really creative way of solving problems. So, we want to make sure we're advocating for tools and techniques and models, not machine learning models, but like more human engagement models that support broad communities coming together.
Yeah, well, the recent Star Wars shows have been all about usually diversity of the force as opposed to the Empire. You put everyone in uniform costumes and you follow the rules, and you don't necessarily shoot that well. So, Chris, you've been doing a bunch of traveling. The technology space is always keeping us busy. We are in the last final stretch before Red Hat Summit. So I know you, me, thousands of other Red Hatters have a lot of activity. Give us, if you can, what should we be expecting? Any key themes you can share? What should we be looking for when we get to Red Hat Summit, which is right down the block from us here in Boston?
Yeah, a couple weeks away, just over there. Well, first of all, like at the highest level, we're sort of thinking about it in two key areas. One is, given the sort of macroeconomic conditions, our customer base is looking at how they can reduce expenses. And so things like automation become really important. So we kind of have a whole day thinking about what can you do to reduce expenses. And one example would be what we showcased at Ansible Fest late last year with what's called Ansible Wisdom, which is generating Ansible playbooks using generative AI. And so that's just one example. We'll be talking more about that and looking at different applications. Another interesting area from a customer point of view is how can we really, it's sort of a bottom line, top line thing. We got to save money on the one side and then increase revenue on the other side. And the revenue growth is really about how quickly can you build new differentiating value into your business. And today that's all with software. So what does that mean? How do you do software development quickly? An easy example that we've been engaging with our customers on is how quickly can you onboard a developer within your enterprise to be effective and producing code. One of the projects that's in that space is Backstage and helping customers build an internal developer portal. We've started contributing to that community, and we'll be talking more about broadly how we build that developer efficiency for businesses. And as I mentioned before, security's in the forefront, especially with some of the high profile issues that come from open source communities. So talking about that supply chain from the earliest phase of code development and open source all the way through to production, and the ways you can instrument a pipeline along there to ensure that you understand the provenance of the code and the security risk profile of the code as you put it into production. And then most importantly, knowing where it is. So if you have an issue, you know how to remediate it. So a whole bunch of things. We've been spending a lot of time on building cloud services, and OpenShift running as a cloud service in the clouds is a primary example. So talking about the evolution there, and then edge compute is capturing a lot of the industry's attentions, where there's solutions to distribute all the way out into a store, into a factory floor, or closer to the producers and consumers of data. So we'll be talking a little bit about what we're doing with Microshift, which brings OpenShift to this tiny footprint. It can fit in robotic arms or in drones or other small footprint devices, which is pretty cool and exciting. And then it'll be hard not to talk about sustainability because all of our customers are getting pressured from ESG policies that are kind of global to explain your footprint, your carbon footprint. And so we'll be talking about what we're doing in the open source community side, as well as how we're working with partners to help customers reduce their power footprint. So a bunch of stuff. It's really going to be exciting and busy, and I'm looking forward
Chris,
to it.
I mean, you'll be on the keynote stage. I'm actually moderating a panel with a couple of our customers in one of the breakout sessions. And what I love, I mean, it is Red Hat Summit and Ansible Fest for the first time, co-located. We have so many customers speaking. We had, thank you so much, all the customers and partners that contributed sessions, because we were overflowing with our main schedule. OpenShift Commons is going to happen on the Monday, which has more customers and partners there. We're finding more overflow. Any customer that wants to come on in the clouds, we'd love to talk and figure that out. We've been sorting some of those pieces out. So yeah, I mean, as I said, so much activity, really good. You went through, I could almost do a little buzzword bingo with, secure supply chain, absolutely. Platform engineering with Backstage, Edge with like ABB and Lockheed have been like super cool. I feel like every briefing we have to show that video of the drone surveillance doing AI inferencing at the edge. I mean, it is awesome. It is great. Chris, every once in a while there's a lull, and it's like, oh, have we done all the technology? Is there anything new? Right now, it's like, oh my gosh, like, can everything just slow down a little bit? As you said, I love that impedance mismatch. We know a lot of our customers is like, hey, there's that really cool thing, but the thing that I learned about 6 months ago, I need to, start adopting it. And, how do I do it? So cloud services help, automation helps, some of these other tools help. And the partnership we have with our customers in our broad ISV ecosystem is awesome. So
yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And I love the presentations coming from customers, because it shows, we can talk about our technology all we want, but when somebody else is showing how they're using it to be successful, it just speaks volumes. So I love spending time with customers because I learn a lot. The risk of being in technology and a little bit divorced from reality is always there. So being connected directly to the real world and what customers are really challenged with is something that I really place a premium on.
Yeah. So Chris, I actually got a great question for you before we wrap. It asked about how do we recruit? They assume that we recruit from a small set of universities like the Berkeley, MITs, Carnegie Mellon, USC. Please tell us, like, where we find our talent globally and, in the communities and everything like that. So,
well, we recruit in the most broadest sense from anywhere that we can find talent. But those schools that you mentioned are actually, are they difficult to establish relationships with, because they're the most prominent, well-known schools, and the biggest companies get to the front of the queue. And in the bigger picture, Red Hat's still a smaller company, so we're more in the back of the queue. So we actually look for slightly less traditional models, whether it's just a different school that doesn't have the same prominent brand. Of course, we're happy to have students from MIT become Red Hatters, but whether it's a different school that doesn't have the same prominent brand, or a lot of work that we do is in open source communities, and therefore a lot of the talent that we find is in open source communities. And some would describe your essentially your GitHub account as your resume. That's very true to us. And as that kind of world grows, we get better and more diverse talent coming out of that world. In the earlier days, it's kind of a small fixed group of people, and now that's really expanded. And so we do internships. We even introduced apprenticeships. Of course, we source directly from schools, but not necessarily those. Our focus is more on schools where we can establish really deep relationships with, and then we have lots of relationships with other companies, and sometimes the people of those companies get excited about what they see Red Hat doing and want to move from a different part of the kind of IT industry into Red Hat and focus more on open source contributions and development. So pretty broad.
Yeah, Chris, it absolutely. I hope that Marco asked it. Thank you. It's a great question, because I see Red Hat. So many people had a relationship in the open source community or with Red Hat. I had worked with Red Hat over 20 years before I joined. I'd been a partner, and Red Hat was a client of mine, and not one of my bigger clients actually, but loved the community, loved the activity. The disclaimer I usually make is like, Chris, I'm not a Linux guy even. Like, I'm a techie and everything like that, but the cloud wave, brought me in, and I, interact with you and much of the,
hybrid platform team before I joined. So I was excited to come on board. And yeah, I've seen interns come in, people from our customer base and from our partners that come in, and we're in and part of these communities. And I think our unique culture shines through and does bring in a lot of the talent. So, all right, Chris, you are super busy. Maybe give a quick plug for like your technical speaking and some of the other places where they can see you and your team's opportunity, outside of Summit, and anything else they should be looking for.
Yeah, well, I do a video show or video series called Technically Speaking. It's relatively short, and it is meaning it's a 6, 7, 8 minutes, not a long format, and it's aimed at just let's do a quick investigation into an interesting technology area with a technology expert. I really enjoy those. We get to talk about a lot of things. Recently, we were just talking about WASM, which is a big topic in the container space and more broadly in the industry around portability and security. So please check that out. I'd love it and love ideas if there's things you want to hear about. We have an interesting website called next.redhat.com, and that's where out of my whole engineering organization, the emerging technologies team shows the work that we're doing that's really not in products yet, but it's sort of where we see interesting technology and where we see things going. So that might be another interesting space to check out.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for everything. Want to say to our audience, please do tune in to Red Hat Summit. You can go to redhat.com/summit. May the 4th be with you and always with you. I'm Stu Miniman. Thank you for joining us on your journey in the clouds.